Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Excuse me. I'm Laura Riley. I'm the Managing Director of Chicago Wilderness Alliance. We're pleased that you can join us. We're going to give it a few more minutes while folks continue to log in. Please keep yourself on mute during the course of the presentation, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and there'll be some time to unmute yourself and ask questions and have discussion.
Back to the car, 7:37, not 7, whatever it was.
We're going to ask everybody just to keep yourself on mute while we're letting folks join us. And my name is Laura Riley. I'm the coordinator of Chicago Wilderness Alliance. And we're going to have some time at the end for question and answer, but you can also feel free to put your questions into the chat as the presentation goes on. You will be sent a recording and a PDF of the slides from today's presentation, and they will also be posted on our website. Okay, well, with that, I would like to thank our sponsors. We're really fortunate to have support from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Urban and Community Forestry Program, as well as the U.S. Forest Service. Because trees are important to human equity and human health, they support these cafes and find out more and look into what it means to become a Tree City USA participant through the Arbor Day Foundation. With that, I'm going to turn over to you, Tarek.
Thank you very much, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm Tarek Shahzad with the Nature Conservancy. I'm on the government relations team for the Illinois chapter. I'm really thankful for Amy Reinell, Danny Robles, and Mohammed Patel for leading this campaign on clean and equitable transportation policy in Illinois, and for their leadership in the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, of which the Nature Conservancy is a member of ICJC and the Chicago Wilderness Alliance. And with that, I'll be turning it over to Amy and Danny to begin the presentation on their newest campaign.
Thanks, Tarek, and thank you everyone with the Chicago Wilderness Alliance for having us here today to talk a little bit more about clean and equitable transportation. If we can move on to the next slide, I would love to talk a little bit more about who we are and how we got started. The Clean and Equitable Transportation Campaign is a branch of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. We are a committee that works very closely with the advocates that have been doing a lot of work with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition to advance policies to help reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, and other sources of pollution in our atmosphere. And as you can see from our initial set of organizations who joined the Clean and Equitable Transportation Campaign, we're a diverse set of groups, anywhere from environmental groups to justice groups, public health, student activists, clean technology, businesses and entrepreneurs, and folks within our communities that are working to increase mobility options that reduce greenhouse gases from transportation and build safer communities. A lot of the work that the Clean and Equitable Transportation Campaign has started up this past year comes from many years of policy development, from community engagement sessions, from talking to different people throughout the state of Illinois to identify what are some of the concerns that they have with the current transportation system and the current transit system, and how do we make sure that we are improving these pieces through policy decisions. And over the course of the last year, we've come and put together a slew of policies that we're going to be talking a bit more about today. But first, let's get to the problem of it all. If we can move to the next slide, for us, the big piece of the puzzle here is where transportation is situated as far as the source of greenhouse emissions in Illinois. Uh, the trajectory that we're seeing is that greenhouse gas is the one sector that continues to increase its sources of greenhouse gases emissions. In the chart here, you see that in 2021, transportation was responsible for about 26.5% of greenhouse gases here in Illinois. In our latest numbers that we saw in 2023, that number has actually bubbled up to 33%. And we know that greenhouse gas emissions are the number one source of global warming. And it's one of the biggest contributing factors why a lot of our coalition partners have gotten involved, because I think we're all in a very uh, we're that nexus point where the work that we do today will definitely help us impact where we move our world towards, and we're very much dedicated in impacting those things here in our home state and making sure that we are part of the solution for long-term goals. But climate change isn't the only factor that plays into this. We are also looking at different health issues that are impacting our communities based on these greenhouse gases. So if we could move to the next slide, want to highlight that here in Illinois, we have 12 counties that are in the top 10% of worst diesel pollution counties. And the rough part about this fact is that many of these counties or many of these locations are also located near Black and brown neighborhoods that are built in highways that were built without taking their livelihood or their health into account. And what we're seeing from some of the reports is that Illinois ranks amongst the top states with the highest number of deaths due to diesel engine pollution per capita. And the diesel pollution is the one of the highest contributing factors for particulate matter in the state of Illinois. Um, for diesel overall, the vehicles that produce diesel are those heavy duty, medium duty vehicles. And although they're only 7% of the roads, or sorry, of the vehicles on the road, they attribute to over 69% of particulate matter in our atmosphere. They attribute over 50% of nitrous oxides into our atmosphere and about 39% of carbon emissions. So they are very heavy contributors to this problem, and this all kind of just like adds itself on top of everything of where pollution and carbon emission is happening. And to add on to that, next slide, is that our transportation system isn't working for everyone. Um, you know, the number one way that we can help reduce carbon emissions is actually from having a robust public transit system um, that can help us take cars off the road, that can help mitigate um, the the issues that are coming from some of those higher levels of carbon emissions and help us alleviate towards that. But what we're seeing is that our transportation system isn't connected as well as it should be. Specifically for folks who live in the northeast part of Illinois, our transportation system has been working in coordinating, collaborating across the three different service systems that are meant to connect Chicagoans and Chicagoland together. And what this is also causing is a need for people to be reliant on cars, even though for a lot of people this becomes a very heavy source of debt and burden. Right now, the to start vehicle costs are historic highs with nearly $40,000 for an average new car. And that's funds that a lot of families can't afford off the bat. And we're seeing a lot of folks either be put in situations where they have to choose between a car or work because they don't have access to some of those public transit systems. And on top of that, we're also seeing issues with our communities where we have become so car centric that we don't share the road well, and we are seeing an increased number of high crash rates due to um, poor transportation infrastructure on the roads, and also poor education on how to share the roads with um, uh, pedestrians and people rolling and cyclists. So the issues with transportation just continue to stack on top of each other. And for many years, transportation advocates had worked almost in silos in each individual area. You had a lot of folks working on um, just the zero emission vehicle component to try to reduce carbon emissions. You had people working to alleviate the sources of public transit and try to streamline the processes through that and make sure that we are funding public transit to the levels it should be. And then you had folks working on talking about access to uh, shifting modes of transportation to make sure that biking and walking and other sources of active modes of transportation were readily available. And that was something that my colleague Amy Rainell identified very early on, that people were doing all this work on so many different layers. And she put a lot of energy to organizing around the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition to bring all these transit and transportation groups together to talk about transportation in a united manner that we can then push to our uh, legislators, but also to the general public to have those conversations on what uh, can we do, what are the things that we can do to shift the way the transportation work. And what we can do is on the next slide is pass a package of laws that will support a commitment for our state to reduce greenhouse gases and increase mobility choices. And in doing so, making sure that we are prioritizing a robust public transit system that is fully funded to make sure that people have reliable and equitable access to public transit to get them to the places that they need to. And at the same time, recognizing that vehicles are still going to be a huge source of our mobility options here in the state of Illinois. And as we are moving to more zero emission technologies, how do we make sure that we are putting the infrastructure plans in place, that we are making in Illinois a attractive state to bring in those zero emission vehicles and make sure that those are available for people who can afford them, but also on the heavier duty side that we are also addressing the need that we need heavy duty vehicles and medium duty vehicles that are that have zero emission vehicle technology, and that we are putting infrastructure in place to ensure that they have the ability to charge where needed. And finally, really looking at the way that we've prioritized transportation spending when we're thinking about building roads and we're thinking about infrastructure to make sure that all this money that we have created towards road building is being spent in ways that will help us reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. So to talk a little bit more about what this package actually does, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amy, right now.
Thanks, Danny. All right, next slide, please. Awesome. So you all probably have a story about a transportation story from today alone. So I hope as Danny laid out the problem, you could see some of the experiences that you have in that. There's a lot that we kind of take for granted in transportation that is harmful, that we are trying to change. So we have introduced the Clean and Equitable Transportation Act, and this is what we're considering to be a real nation-leading set of policies related to transportation and jobs in transportation that work together to provide Illinoisans more clean, affordable, equitable transportation options. So as part of the act, we have three main components. And for those of you who have worked on the legislative process before, you'll know there's actually, for some of these multiple pieces of legislation that will get us to where we need to go. Transportation Choices Act. This is perhaps the wonkiest piece of the puzzle. This is working to have the state set a target to reduce emissions from the transportation sector to get to 100% carbon free by 2050. And the and is really important because we've set targets before, aligns state spending and decision-making in transportation to that goal to incentivize investing in clean and equitable transportation. So right now, transportation funding is primarily going to roadways and highway expansion and things like that. So by setting this target and requiring that the state meets it, some of those dollars will have to go to other cleaner transportation, like transit, like our charging infrastructure, like clean trucks. So this is kind of the insider baseball piece of legislation that after my organization, Active Transportation Alliance, after decades of trying to change culture within and policy within the Department of Transportation, have landed on this is the thing we need to do. We need to force them, even though we've tried to force them before to do different things. So this is a big one. The second piece of legislation you may have seen in the news over the last week, which is called the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act. And this brings together transit reform and much more significant investing in transit. And there have been no fewer than 4 reports that have recommended having a unified transit system in Northeastern Illinois. So we're calling it for the moment, the Metropolitan Mobility Authority. And the commensurate investment of state resources into making our transit system a choice system so that people choose to ride it. And for people who have to ride it without choices, they're getting much better service. And then the third piece of the puzzle, which Danny talked about, is our Zero Emissions Transportation Act that takes a lot of the work and advocacy that's been happening around clean vehicles, charging, clean trucks, and puts forth a piece of legislation with all of that together to move the dial. There have been other things attempted here in Illinois to get the governor to do that have not yet stuck. So we're also trying to legislate it. Next slide, please. So I'll dig into each of these just a tiny bit more. I don't think I can move the slides, so someone else has to. Oh, there we go. So RMI has been modeling what these policies would mean for Illinois. And so this slide is kind of a complex infographic that looks at the long-term benefits if we start making some of these decisions. As Danny said, transportation is the leading cause of GHG emissions in Illinois. And quite troubling, it's been getting worse, not better, even though our vehicles are getting cleaner and even though they're more fuel efficient. We have seen an increase in vehicle miles traveled. So this policy package is in part designed to decrease reliance on vehicles for every single trip. So one of the things that's core to what this graphic is showing is increasing mobility choices such that people remove 1 out of every 5 car trips from their week. And that the power of that for climate and for health and life is tremendous. And that results from a few different things. If we design our roadways And in Chicago, we have 4,000 miles of roadway, not including alleys. If we design them less for speed and less as vehicles as the only user, and increase safety for pedestrians, for example, or bike lanes, lives are saved. If people have more choices and can get from 2 cars down to 1, the financial savings is tremendous. And similarly, safety goes up because there are fewer vehicle crashes. Again, through this package, if we achieve what we want to achieve, we will see from that very first sentence an overwhelming decline in emissions, which you can see there as the equivalent to shutting down 82 coal plants, or 768 natural gas plants. So really powerful climate impacts as well. And we did this because we wanted to make sure that the reasons we're doing this policy and the policies themselves actually relate to one another. We wanted to see what the impact would be. Next slide, please. So I'll just for a second talk about a few more of the policies. So transit has been underfunded for a very long time. We, as a state, provide about 17% of the region's transit operating revenue, whereas other major urban area transit systems get much more support from their states. I believe in Philadelphia, it's up to 50% of their operating money comes from the state. Illinois has never invested in our region's transit system that way. Illinois does provide about 65% of transit operations for outside the Chicago region. So all the small transit agencies get a lot more state support. We can see, for those of you who take transit, that it's really, really struggling. And it hasn't even gotten to what is going to be an incredible budget gap, operating budget gap. Some people call it a fiscal cliff. It's more like a waterfall that grows over time, starting at about $700 million. So the folks that have been working on transit reforms have worked for the last 18 months on a plan that has now been put into legislation called the Metropolitan Mobility Authority, as I mentioned. And that would unify the transit agencies, unify the fare structure, unify service planning, unify capital planning, in a way that for someone who lives, let's say in Austin, neighborhood of Chicago, but they work in on the strip on Madison and Forest Park, they can actually get off their CTA bus. Or right now they have to get off their CTA bus and walk many, many blocks to get to a PACE bus. Under a new system, they could stay on the same bus, theoretically, treating the system as a whole. So that's what's being worked on with transit. It's estimated the system needs about $1.5 billion new in revenue. And the legislators working on this have said that there will be no new revenue without reform. So we're happy to share the bill number if you guys want to get into the weeds or talk more about it later. Next slide. Oh, here, I forgot. I can't even remember what's in here. We present so much. I don't even know my name anymore. So what we're putting forward is new operation money plus a modernized structure to get to that robust transit system. What that $1.5 billion includes is more service midday, more service on the weekends, things like regional rail. So the Metra, which is commuter rail, heavy rail, not having the city's downtown as its terminus. In fact, a lot of those train lines, they could have the downtown stop and keep going in the city up to the northern suburbs, for example. There are ways to make that system like a mini Amtrak, but for our region. And we just haven't had the money or the political will to do it. A big thing is also bus rapid transit and just more desirable transit, cleaner, safer, and much more accessible. Next slide. For the clean vehicles policies, welcome to our word salad. I forgot to say at the beginning that we are drawing, especially for the clean vehicles policies and the GHG policy, the Transportation Choices Act, we're drawing heavily from policies that have passed in other places and are being implemented and shown to be very impactful. Because we don't want to recreate the wheel. So, Danny, do you mind just taking a minute on this one since you lead this more than I do?
Definitely. Thanks, Amy. And as Amy has been stating, for the clean vehicle policies, this one particularly is one that is a tough challenge for us to work through because there's really only two governing bodies in the country that can pass emission standards. And one of them is the federal level, and the other one is CARB, which is the California Air Regulatory Board, and those are the only two um, agencies that have passed legislation, and the one in California has some of the more advanced rules. And essentially, what we have been trying to do here in the state of Illinois over the last few years is get Governor Pritzker to sign on to the advanced clean car rules to get Illinois to be one of the states that will sell larger portions of advanced clean vehicles. We haven't had as much luck getting Governor Pritzker to do it in an executive format. So our set of policies are trying to do it through the legislative route to ensure that we have an opportunity to move the needle forward with a larger set of stakeholders. So these rules in particular are meant to be manufacturer sale mandates that will start off by 2028 and will go through 2035 and essentially increase the number of zero emission vehicles sold in the state of Illinois. The Advanced Clean Car Trucks rule and the heavy duty omnibus no nitrous oxide rule are combined as a package for heavy duty and medium duty vehicles. The Advanced Clean Trucks rule states that a certain percentage of vehicles class 2A to class 8, and those are anything from pickup trucks all the way to your long haulers and everything in between, from school buses to delivery vans to the set heavy duty machinery that you see in construction sites would all have higher levels of sale requirements, but they won't meet 100% sale requirements by 2035. The rules don't stipulate that yet, and the technology hasn't gotten there. And in doing so, there's still going to be over 50% of vehicles on the road that are still going to be diesel engine vehicles, and that is where the heavy duty but now nitrous oxide rule comes in, stating that any new diesel vehicle built after 2028 has to have higher higher and more stringent rules in nitrous oxide emissions, where it would almost eliminate nitrous oxide by 90% of what is in current use. Now, the other pieces, Advancing Cars 2, that is the latest set of rules and the most ambitious set of rules in the country that essentially would have all zero emission vehicles for light duty passenger vehicles be zero emission vehicle that would be a lot more advanced than what is currently being introduced at the federal level, and would also help us put Illinois as a major competitor to ensure that the the newest models of clean vehicles, zero emission vehicles, hybrid vehicles come to Illinois for Illinois as options for sale. That is something that we're seeing across the country, that the states that have passed Advanced Clean Cars 2 have the latest models being sold in their lots, and it makes it more encouraging for folks to have those options. And finally, the other pieces to our clean vehicle policies are making sure that the vehicles that our government and our local institutions are purchasing do have electrical vehicle infrastructure and packages and um, rebates available to make sure that we are making them easier for people to access. And there's a lot of big impacts that come from these clean vehicle policies. I think the next slide talks a little bit more about what the impacts state. So we can move on to the next slide. There's just a lot of societal benefits when it comes down to both funding and also health impacts and just the creation of jobs. And I think that's something that us in the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition talk a lot about, is that the policies that we're introducing here also have a lot of implications for the personal economy for individual people, or that will have options to have more jobs in the near future, and jobs that are healthier in the long run. So these flexibilities also make sure that the manufacturers sell at a discounted rate to community to areas where environmental injustice has happened in the last several decades, to ensure that people have access to these benefits. And then I think I'm gonna pass it back to you, Amy, to talk a little more about the greenhouse gas bill.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So the greenhouse gas target would eliminate GHGs in the transportation sector, as I mentioned, by prioritizing clean transportation options for funding. Obviously, there are times when a roadway needs to be built, so there's part of this law that includes what are called mitigations. So different things that could be added into the project or invested in to make a difference. It will build a more racially equitable transportation system by increasing mobility options and providing more affordable transportation. And then we'll create jobs in mobility sectors and provide more options for those without cars to access jobs. We do listening sessions throughout the year and town halls. And one of the most common barriers that come up with transportation are people are not able to access jobs easily. And especially evening and first shift jobs that start really early by transit. And they're the same types of jobs that don't pay quite enough to be able to afford a car. So we want to be able to make investments there. Next slide. This is a lot to digest, but I'll just give you a quick example. This is just showing if we can shift a little bit of transportation dollars, the increase in choices that people have. And we understand that the choices are going to differ based on geography. So for this audience, we'll just look at the urban example, where you can see there's more buses and more safe bike lanes, for example. Next slide. We may be out of slides. So our campaign just launched in the sense that we've gone public, that we've had a working group working for the last year, and then another subset of us working for the year before that on getting this off the ground. It is a really ambitious package of policies, but it is very timely, very relevant to what Illinoisans want and need. And we are always coalition building. So you can email Danny or I if you want to get looped in to the group, or if you have constituents where you would want us to come do a session. We call them listen lead shares, where we're learning from communities, sharing what we've been learning, and working on improving all these policies. This is sort of our opening draft of policies that we're putting out into the world for reaction. So thanks for having us today. Now we can do questions, reactions, concerns, ideas. We're open to all of it.
Alicia. I see your hand is
Yeah,
raised.
thanks so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. So many of us on the call are from the conservation or environmental community. For those of us who are more familiar with like environmental or conservation advocacy and maybe aren't members of the ICJC, but still have the bandwidth and interest in aiding and supporting efforts here, how can we help?
Well, definitely you can reach out to either myself or Amy, and we can schedule a one-on-one and figure out like where your advocacy and your expertise can be most helpful. Right now, we are looking to have more conversations with community members. I think one of the things that we have been identifying is that we want to hear back from um the general public of like are they interacting with transportation, what kind of transit questions or issues are coming up within their neighborhood, their suburb, their community, so we can better develop these plans and have those conversations with legislators, and also for folks who maybe do a little bit of this um lobbying or legislative outreach, connecting with us so we can make sure that we can continue providing up to date information on where the policy is shifting, what the policy goals are, and who are our legislative champions and people that we're trying to bring on, so we can get a little bit of additional support in bringing people into this work.
Thank you. How about Tarek and then Ted and then Renee?
Laura, will you stop sharing the slide so we can see folks?
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you both for the presentation. It was great. In terms of the next steps for the campaign, if y'all could expand on what you envision things are going to look like through the end of May with the ending of the state legislative session, and then what you imagine the summer will look like.
You want to talk about Lobby Day, Danny, since that's, well, it's this week. I was going to say next week, but oh my goodness,
Yeah.
it's in a few days.
Lobby Day came up pretty fast on us, so if folks are still interested in Lobby Day, I think the registration did close last week, but we can make adjustments. If y'all want to email my colleague Blake in signing up to come down and join over 400 different environmentalists in the state of Illinois to talk to legislators about these policies and other policies that will help promote grid capacity and transmission and battery storage that will help prevent carbon capture sequestration being part of the solution here in Illinois, and also starting to have the conversation on what clean buildings look like in the state of Illinois. So this will just kind of kickstart a series of conversations with legislators, but this summer we're also going to be doing listen, lead, share conversations with community members across the state of Illinois, and we would welcome folks to either participate in those, or if you have a neighborhood group or a community group that you are part of and want to help host one of them, definitely let myself know, and we'll start coordinating that with our LLS team.
We'll just get into this.
Thank you. Ted?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This was great. So I'm curious, we've heard a little bit of next steps, but you know, if this is anything like CJA, it's going to take a lot more than those next steps. Can you give us some sort of context and assessment of, you know, how big the coalition is, where, besides these listening sessions and just getting started, where you really think you need help other than community listening and stuff like that? That would be great. Thank you.
Awesome question. So there's a sense of urgency around all of it, and it comes from a few directions. For transit will be running out of money for operations by the end of 2025. So the solutions need to happen next year. We're probably in year 3 of the development of solutions with legislative leaders, but they are going to require a lot of political capital to get there. On clean vehicles, we had hoped, I think, through the work of the Net Zero Coalition to already have these things in place. Because just the way these rules work, with each passing year, we just get farther and farther away from reaching the goals. So, and these are ones that don't really cost the government a lot of money. So, but they have a really big impact as we look out farther. And then for the Transportation Choices Act, so much federal dollars have come into our state through IIJA and IRA for transportation. And it's being spent, some of it, a lot of it's being spent very well, fixing our bridges, you know, things that really need to happen, doing some rail expansions that need to happen. But the majority of it's going to maintaining what is an absurd amount of roadway in our state. So the urgency around that bill is we're spending money badly. And we have tried in a lot of different ways to turn the tide on that and have not succeeded. So we need to go harder. So that's urgent too. But we obviously understand we're not going to get everything, you know, in 1 year. So, but we are working them. So each piece of legislation has been independently introduced and introduced as an act. And the act in many ways is targeted at the governor. This is a climate aspirational governor. He does understand climate, but has not been forward on transportation. So this is an opportunity for the governor to really put a stake in the ground differently. But we can't assume that he will do that. So we're also operating at many tiers, if that makes sense. And then we've been cultivating some really important champions, but we don't have all of them. And we don't have all the leaders on board and the caucuses. So doing a lot of that groundwork right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Renee.
Thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful to get a recap of everything. I saw the press release and stuff go out, but thanks for pulling this group together. I have a question from the technical side, like on the clean vehicles and the medium and heavy duty. My understanding is that like we don't have the technology right now to go net zero, especially if you're thinking like organizations with fleets that have larger equipment. So how are you thinking about, like, are you thinking about phases or like different phases of introducing stuff for a technical resources hub to help get places that have fleets to keep achieving as the technology gets better for those fleets and larger vehicles?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely like a phased in approach that we're working where our other colleague Mohammed isn't here, but right now he's also working on another bill called Powering Up Illinois, which would help the electric utilities have flexibility in developing more capacity for the upcoming heavy duty fleets that are coming online. I think something that NRDC has learned in California is that the grid just wasn't ready for some of like the larger fleets, and a lot of that came from like the roadblocks that come within the public utility companies to be able to like update their grid capacity and plans. And I think we're trying to make it a little bit easier and streamlined for them to get there. I think for us too, just realizing that like heavy duty, medium duty vehicles, like the more that people demand on them, the easier and faster that they're built. So I think that's why the advanced clean trucks rule starts off at like a 20% sale requirement in 2028. It doesn't ramp up to 50% till 2035 to give manufacturers that build up time to get there towards those sales.
Thanks.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, Amy and Danny, but I thought I'd throw it out there anyway. I assume there's no appetite for anything outside very sort of specific pertinences to transportation, right? We're not talking funding for complete streets or other things that might go along with this and be very beneficial to societies, right?
The Transportation Choices Act would fuel more dollars into complete streets. And we are working, oh my gosh, so hard on removing other barriers to complete streets, which primarily relate to trucks and truck allowability and the size of trucks on our roadways. So there may be, we passed a law last year that we thought solved the problem, but IDOT won't implement it. But we think we've come to an agreement. So there may be a piece of legislation, if you're on our list, that we may be having folks take action on. But trucks are, and COVID has just exacerbated it all. People are just now sitting at home waiting for everything to arrive. So trucks is the big thing. But assuming we can get all these other policy barriers removed, this will create more money for complete streets. And it's really important if we think about wilderness and the harms that transportation does, both in relation to the amount of concrete and asphalt used, the noise pollution, which is unbelievable. I don't know if any of you have ever done Bike the Drive, which is our when we shut down the Lakeshore Drive. And one of the most remarkable parts of that experience is the silence. And you see what we've done to our lakefront park by putting a highway there. So these policies are trying, as it relates to the mission of the work you all are doing, trying to create more quiet, more less asphalt, more green space by providing alternatives. But it's big and it will take a lot of years.
I had a question that's sort of tangential to this, because I know it's not really about transportation, but when we talk about particulate matter and we talk about greenhouse gas emissions and we talk about noise, I'm just thinking about landscape equipment and the really outsized impact that it has in all of those, right? Because it is louder and like a lot more particulates, you know, and gasoline like per hour used compared to a car, or even probably like an Amazon truck or things like that. And I'm just curious if you can like provide any insight into maybe what's going on in that area.
I can say that I know Oak Park has been working on this, but I don't know that Chicago has. But I think there's these equity sensibilities around the companies, you know, are primarily low income Latino run organizations. And there's concern about like, how do we help with a just transition is what we would call it there. So I know that's something Oak Park's working on, but I'm sure there are other communities as well. But there is a really good meme going around about the cicadas and people saying we already have all the noise from the leaf blowers.
Any other questions?
Do we think the standalones will get picked up this year through lobby day activities, or do we expect this to continue next year and get revised as new houses come in and we have to start over? Just gut question.
And there is always a chance on transit that it gets backdoored in through veto session or lame duck, but I doubt it because of how much money it needs. So the legislators wanted this introduced so they could start the hard conversations and negotiation. But I don't know. I want to be proven wrong. I don't think things will happen this year, except for really important conversations and hearings, but I could be wrong.
And that sort of brings me to the next question, like, would it be helpful to get other people, if they have the time on Wednesday or Thursday, to go down if, right, transportation is very central to this, but is not exactly central and comfortable to us. And
Mhm.
Springfield, as I found out last week, is a really tough place to lobby if you're not used to lobbying. So do you have some words of comfort there or help or anything if people are interested in going down?
Wear comfortable shoes. No, we've been, I'm not actually not kidding. And I also always bring my lunch and caffeine. But Danny's and IEC have been working on some elevator pitches to help make it easier to talk about. And then there's team leads for the groups that are a little more steeped in the policies. But it's going to be a busy day, so we expect the conversations to be quite short. But
And I guess, do you have any holes that you need filling in terms of representatives and constituents?
I don't know if you can see that quickly, Danny.
I'm pretty sure we do. Don't know where like the biggest gaps are. You know, our group is usually pretty like heavy in on the northeastern part of Illinois, and I think where we're probably going to need some additional support is some of the downstate areas. And you know, sometimes that's a difficult ask too, because like legislators really like lean into what their constituents are saying and have a harder time having those conversations with people who are not in those communities. But we might be able to get a couple folks to like listen in based on the information that we're bringing down to them.
We already know there's also going to be public hearings throughout the region this summer on transit in particular. So a lot of opportunities to participate there.
Which of these three do you think is the most realistic right now?
I want to say it's public transit, just because there's a lot of energy around like where frustrations are with folks in the Chicagoland area. And I think the solution that is being presented has a lot of support from our metropolitan planning organization and legislators who really led into this run. I think Senator Villavalo and Representative Delgado are rolling up their sleeves to do a lot of this heavy lifting, and we're looking to support them in that.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful to hear, given that that could be an easy tie-in with us is access to open space, right?
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Thank you.
David, do you have a question, David? Any other questions? I want to thank Amy and Danny so much for this presentation. I really learned a lot and appreciate being so current. And I know that there's been a lot of movement and that you've been very busy this spring. So thank you for taking a time out from your very busy schedule to give this cafe. And we look forward to finding ways to learn more and support your work moving forward. I also really appreciate everyone's patience with the technical glitch today. I apologize for whatever happened and look forward to sharing a recording and a PDF of the slides with you all. And thank you for joining us today.